Good afternoon. In chapter 6 of Laudato Si, the Holy Father talks about ecological education and spirituality. And I think it's proper for us to spend a little bit of time looking explicitly about how he articulates it. What are some of the explicit concerns that he has? And one thing becomes very clear, certainly in this document, but in other things that the Holy Father has said and written recently. A real concern of his is consumerism. This is paragraph 203. Since the market tends to promote extreme consumerism in an effort to sell its products, people can easily get caught up in the whirlwind of needless buying and spending. Compulsive consumerism is one example of how the techno-economic paradigm affects individuals. Romano Guardini, remember, long time ago that man was very popular. So this is what he said. I remember him in the 50s and 60s, mostly the 50s. This is what he said back then. He had already foreseen this. The gadgets and techniques, this is a quote, the gadgets and techniques forced upon him by the patterns of machine production and of abstract planning, mass man accepts quite simply that they are forms of life itself. I've tried to point out how much of the opposition that Jesus faced, as we find in the Gospels, much of the opposition really had to do with the restructuring of economic society, or the economic restructuring of society, which of course has to do with anthropology and cosmology, how we interact with the natural world, which is at the heart of what we are as people. We cannot not be consumers. We would not survive. So it's not the issue of consumerism, it's what he calls here extreme consumerism. We are only beginning to realize and to try to reshape our lives in such a way that in a certain sense we do not inordinately contribute to the raping of earth, to the destruction of it, and undermining its ability to regenerate itself. We're only beginning to do that, and we're beginning to do it because now we are suffering the consequences of our lifestyles over the many generations. Now let's just say, just for thinking imaginatively, let's say that the Sisters of St. Agnes in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, made a very radical commitment to reduce our use of elements of the natural world. I'm not making that suggestion, and by saying that, I am not saying, that I find fault with what we're doing. I'm just saying, let's say that we did that. We cut down on our use of electricity. We cut down in our use of water, and we didn't shop like we normally shop, even though we are doing it in a way that is simplified. But if we really made a radical stand, appreciate how that would change the economic structure of this city. And realize also, not everyone would be happy with that. Again, I am not saying that we should do it in a radical way. I don't support that. That might also mean we got to cut back on medication, cut back on doctor care. I'm not suggesting this. I'm just saying I'm being radical in order for us to realize This would make not only an impact on the city, a negative impact on the city. People would be up in arms. Realizing that should give us insight into what Jesus faced. He made some radical decisions. The radical decisions, as you read them, share with the poor, in itself, that's not radical. It's not radical. Depends upon how you share with the poor. In itself, he said, share with the poor. Take in the stranger. That's hospitality, a very important virtue that Jesus speaks about. As we look at them, they don't appear to be radical. Maybe that's why we're not radically living them out. I don't know. All I want to say is, when we begin to touch the purse strings, society stands up and says, stop. That is not uncommon. And the Holy Father is asking us to look seriously about our involvement in extreme consumerism. Just as I said, we cannot not be anthropocentric. That's the only way we see anything, is through human eyes. He doesn't find fault with that kind of anthropocentrism. It's radical, where we judge the value of everything in terms of how it affects us. And we can talk about that now. There's been such overlapping. I'm sure you recognize so much overlapping what I've said these days. Even though I look at a slightly different point of view or a slightly different theme, there's overlapping. So it's not anthropocentrism and it's not consumerism, though usually when we use those two words, we are thinking of them in their radical sense. But I want to say, in order to survive, we must be consumers. And we understand everything through human eyes. What we have to do is look at them seriously. He goes on and talks to either a greater or lesser degree. He refers to mass man. He was not aware of gender biased language either. Mass man is convinced that his conformity to both is reasonable and just. It's reasonable, to be a radical consumer. This paradigm leads people to believe that they are free as long as they have the supposed freedom to consume. Freedom is a big word nowadays, and look where it's getting us. But those really free are the minority who wield economic and financial power. Amid this confusion, he sees that as confusion, postmodern humanity has not yet achieved a new self-awareness capable of offering guidance and direction, and this lack of identity is the source of anxiety. We have too many means and only a few insubstantial ends. And he goes on and really speaks against radical consumerism. But I want to point out a couple of things that he says about the spirituality. He speaks, first of all, about education. From what I know, which is very little in this field, educational system has really changed in grade school and high school from when we were there. Really changed. It is not uncommon that kids in grade school learn about sustainability. I mean, when was the first time you came across that word? But they're being raised with different insights, thank God. A responsibility that they have. And I know, not my niece, but the niece, my nephew's daughter, so it would be my great niece. She's studying down in Carbinsville, which is Illinois. She's getting a master's degree in some kind of sustainable engineering, which is not an uncommon contemporary area of great interest of that generation. So things are moving, but the hope is in the next generation, not necessarily in ours. So the picture is not as bleak as we sometimes think it is. So education is significantly changing. But I would like us to think a little bit about what he calls economic conversion. And that's also in chapter 6. This conversion calls for a number of attitudes which together foster a spirit of generous care. This is paragraph 220, if anybody's looking for it. Generous care, full of tenderness. So there is nothing keeping us from developing that kind of a worldview. Care of the universe. Tenderness toward the natural world. Nothing is keeping us from developing that attitude. First, it entails gratitude and graciousness. A recognition that the world is God's loving gift and that we are called quietly to imitate God's generosity in self-sacrifice and good works. So the Holy Father is asking us to do that, not necessarily restructuring the economic structures of Fond du Lac. It also entails a loving awareness that we are not disconnected from the rest of creatures, but joined in a splendid universal communion. And that brings me once again to the Canticle of the Sun, where Francis demonstrates what the Holy Father calls connectedness with the rest of creation in the splendid universal communion. Most high, all-powerful, all-good Lord, all praise is yours, says Francis, all glory, all honor, and all blessing. Be praised, my Lord, through brother sun. Be praised, my Lord, through sister moon. Be praised, my Lord, through our brother turkeys, who strut and gobble with a dignity that manifests their royal nature. Despite or perhaps because of it, this nobility, they offer themselves to us as festive food. Be praised, my Lord, through our sister the does, along with their fawns, who delight us with a grace and agility with which they bound across the land. The gentleness of their eyes mirrors your gentle care for us. Be praised, my Lord, for our brother frogs, who ward off bugs that might endanger the yard. Standing guard at the edge of the pond, they watch during the day and croak during the night. Be praised, my Lord, for our sister grass, who blankets our world, making it soft to the bare foot and restful to the eye. Be praised, my Lord, for the song of birds that herald the new day, for the thunder that rolls through the heavens, announcing the rain, for the simplicity of the creek that carries the secret of life-giving water. If he can think like that, why not us? So it is, again, we can develop that kind of sensitivity and gratitude and creativity. So it's an awareness that we are not disconnected, He goes on in the next paragraph. This awareness that each creature reflects something of God and has a message to convey to us. And again, I want to suggest, it sounds like trite playing. I don't believe it is. Look at the elements of the natural world. What of God do they manifest to you? Strength, protection, generosity. Where do you suppose that comes from, if not from God? It's awareness that each creature reflects something of God. Maybe instead of having an examination of conscience, what we've done wrong, if you still do an examination of conscience at 20 minutes after 4 in the afternoon, what we should do is look at the natural world and try to find out, what have we been missing? God created the world, writing into it an order and a dynamism that human beings have no right to ignore. Remember, the Holy Father said in this document that our care of the earth becomes a moral issue. A moral issue. And we cannot say, I'm concerned about my own salvation. We carry the responsibility that is bigger. Not that our own salvation is not important, but that kind of language reflects a kind of individualistic spirituality. We are now living in a different era. And if you want to use the language salvation or redemption or fulfillment or holiness, it develops as we are opened to the needs of the world today, which are our needs today. And it has to include care of our common home, to use his language. It must include that. He goes on and talks about joy and peace. And he also mentions, again, our obsession with consumerism. We get that in stories on television, if not on the commercials. That, of course, is what the commercial's all about. And again, that sense, get what you deserve. You deserve this. We are entitled to this. It's wrong kind of thinking. I have to admit to you, I'm not always sure that I want to get what I deserve. There's another phrase that he uses, less is more. Less is more. That comes right after he's talking about the obsession of consumption. We need to take up an ancient lesson found in different religious traditions, and also in the Bible. It is a conviction that less is more. A constant flood of new consumer goods can baffle the heart and prevent us from cherishing each thing and each moment. Again, I don't believe it's out of hard-heartedness. It's just we're not always reflective of how captive we are in some elements of our contemporary society that are not the best. We talk about leaving the world. What world do we leave? We carry it right in with us. And to leave the world does not mean leaving that world. It means leaving this world, the world in our minds and in our hearts that reflect certain values that are alien to what our religious tradition calls us to. He goes on and continuing in that chapter and talks about civic and political love, which is just a section, which is then, again, he elaborates on in his next document, Fratelli Tutti, civic and political love, which I'm not going to go into. But I urge you to look at what he says about ecological spirituality. Look at what he says. And we can do some things that appear to be very small, but remember, a constant small drop of water can wear away an awful lot of things. And in a very real sense, for most people, we're only asked to do small things, but we're asked to do them in big ways. I don't remember the author, but somebody recently that I was reading said, what makes a saint is they do ordinary things in an extraordinary way. The way we fill our plates, the way we shop, the way we use the things that we have, the way we do it is the way we practice our religion. So I encourage you, read that document, read that paragraph particularly. Go back to the Canticle of the Sun and read that. Let that be your meditation for a while. And I want to just pull together, which I have already done a couple of times, but this will be the last time, what I consider to be some of the very, very important themes that I try to share with you. And it's not that I consider them. This is what, people who are much more grounded in these questions than I am, and that you are, what they think is really essential if we're going to move in that direction. And they always begin with anthropology, anthropocentrism. In a certain sense, anthropocentrism is not our crowning glory, it's our limitation. It means that that's the only way we can see things, which is a limitation. And limitations are not bad. They simply mean when your eyes are open, you can look forward, but you can't see what's going on in the back. I mean, it's limitation in that way. So they begin with radical anthropocentrism. And there's enough material there for examination of conscience for all of us, both as individuals, and the phrase that I use, I mean, who do we think we are, really? The primary theme, of course, from our biblical tradition is the notion of image of God. Because the notion image of God sets limits to anthropology. We are not divine. To be divinized is something different. They use that language, that we become what Jesus was. That's true, but not the way Jesus was it. Right? So image of God sets a limit to what it means to be a human being, but it also opens that limit up in magnificent ways. I try to point out that on the one hand, we really think we're more than we are. And on the other hand, we're much more than we think we are. And we have to hold those in balance. We manifest to the world what God is in a way the tree does not, as wonderful as the tree is, and manifests something about God. We do it in a way the tree doesn't. And remember that Jesus was one of us. Jesus was one of us. Jesus was an earthling. It's difficult to use that kind of language. because we know he was more than that, but he was that. Because if he wasn't, then there's an awful lot of theology that's wrong. Then you can just throw out the hypostatic union. You can throw out the whole idea that he was true man. To become true man means you're an earthling. Now how it fits together, nobody knows except God. Although we have very, very intricate definitions. So that's the first thing. The second thing, the interconnectedness. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but it doesn't hurt us to constantly think about these things. The interconnectedness, not just with each other, but with everything else as well. With everything else as well. And the third one, dependence, interdependence. We are totally dependent on the elements of the natural world, and if we assume our responsibility and our dignity as image of God, then they are dependent on our fidelity to act like an image of God. Otherwise, we act like ogres. Otherwise, we are monsters in the world in which the rest of the natural creation has got to exist. We become monsters. We become rapers. We become consumers, those who gobble up everything. Right? So that's where the interdependence is. They are dependent on us to be faithful. I'd like to read and end with a prayer, another prayer. It's a book of prayers to the evolutionary God, which is a very interesting book. But this one is called To Have a Part, Honored to Participate. Think about that. Honored to participate. I give thanks, holy mystery, to have a part in this evolutionary phenomenon, and to strive for communion with all life, however diverse and bewildering, to be alive and conscious in the midst of an enfolding universe whose existence stretches back an almost unthinkable passage of time, almost an inconceivable ocean of space. To know my own true name this day is to recognize myself to be your creature, your child, your very hope and promise, and to pledge myself as faithful as I can to celebrate my part in this colossal drama with passion and humility. Amen.